questions. I'm wondering what happens to the stuff in the winter when the weather changes? I was also wondering, what does your job look like on a day-to-day?
Good question.
And Carolyn, do you want your drink? I don't know what it is.
Oh, yeah, maybe we're watching. Thanks for
So what's your day like?
Oh, it's right near your feet. Thanks. Okay, so in the winter, actually, what we've seen is that, you know that, I should have brought the slide, but the slide that showed bike lanes being built, ridership going up, there's another cool slide that shows that winter cycling every year has gotten, like, is pretty much staying closer to the same as on season. So this idea that people just put their bikes away in the winter is actually not really true anymore. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we've gotten people hooked on bike transportation. And once you start commuting with your bike, it's actually, I mean, from experience, really hard to go back. It's a different thing to take the subway every day. Not that it's bad, it's just, I think that because there's a great network built, just because it's the winter doesn't mean people aren't going to use it. And our seasons aren't that intense, you know. I mean, we get some snow. We had a lot of snow last year, but one of the things that we worked really hard to do over the years was make sure that the Department of Transportation was clearing the bike lanes when it snowed, just like they clear the road for cars. Because I think the worst possible scenario is that people do count on their bikes and are using their bikes through the winter, but they're not being taken care of. The infrastructure isn't being taken care of. And so we led a couple big campaigns to make sure that the bridges were being cleared, the bike paths on the bridges. And that's been a huge, huge thing too. In terms of my job on the day-to-day, honestly, it's a combination of staff management. I have a pretty big team of staff that I manage, and that's been really cool, definitely a learning experience. I mean, I think, obviously, I think the key to success in any context is like multiplying leaders, right? I sort of like, I feel like a good leader gives power away all the time. And so that's always my goal with my team, is just to make sure they have everything they need to be successful and go out and do the work we do. The other part of my time is actually spent right now on this group called Families for Safe Streets. And it's a group that I helped launch in the winter, and it's a group of people that have lost loved ones in traffic crashes or been seriously injured themselves. And sort of like our borough committees, they're operating as a group within our organization, and I'm sort of the community organizer that works with them and supports them and helps them develop strategic campaigns. We just won a bill to lower the speed limit in New York City. And so from February till about beginning of July, that's like all I was working on. And I think that's been huge. Actually, the mayor signed the bill today in New York. So, yeah.
So I saw online, I forget what city it was either like Copenhagen or San Francisco, but they like implemented these pedals that are on the street that are powered by the grid or something, but it takes you uphill. So bikers who need to go uphill, they can just stop and put their off leg on the pedal, and they'll take them uphill. So
Is it like electric assist? Is that
yeah, it's like an electric assistant. I was just wondering if that was an idea that was going on in New York City at all, or?
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. There's an interesting debate that's been going on in New York City about electric bikes, because the sort of the most common use of them in New York City right now is food delivery. And there's been a lot of complaints about like bike behavior among food delivery workers, basically. And so a lot of people have blamed the e-bikes or the electric bikes for that. I think that they're probably part of the way that a city would get to a bigger bike mode share. In other words, a lot of people, I think, that may want to use a bike could use that boost, right? Could use that assist. And so I think in the longer term, if we're going to have all different types of people riding bikes, I think they're part of the solution for sure.
I was just curious, do you guys have the stats on like pre-bike lane injuries to like now? What's the difference?
There's another side like that. It's basically, the exact math of it, I'm blanking on, but is anyone familiar with the Peter Jacobson's safety in numbers research? Basic premise of it is as the rate of bicycling goes up, the rate of crashes goes down, and that's been true in New York too. So we have something called the commuter cyclist indicator, and then they track crashes as that indicator goes up, and we've basically just been seeing the numbers plummet, which is good trend.
I have two questions. First of all, have you seen a difference in the way that Obviously, with there being a large amount of people biking to work, with the way that people are setting up their workplaces to include like showers and more bike racks. And my second question is, I'm currently taking civil engineering. We have a transportation class, and they talk about designing roads to a C standard, where they're, because it is so much more expensive, we only design it not for peak flow, et cetera. Have you noticed anything in peak flow of traffic in the bike lane areas, as well any problems with engineers dealing with the concept of building for a different mode?
So in terms of the employer piece, we helped pass a piece of city legislation that's called Bike Access to Buildings. And for a while there was like, every bike ride begins and ends with parking, right? So there was this big impediment to people biking to work, which is that they had nowhere to put their bike, right? And so what we've seen, that law has made it a requirement for buildings to give access to bikes. As long as your employer agrees to allow you to keep your bike in the office, you have to be able to bring your bike in the building, which is a huge change. And I think in addition to that, we've seen a lot of employers, big ones too, like symbolic employers, really sort of begin to tie their employee benefits package to this notion of having a bike commuter lifestyle. So whether it's Google, which has got a big office in New York, or Time we work with, one of the ways we try to encourage that and make that really visible is we have this thing called the Bike Commuter Challenge once a year. It happens around National Bike to Work Day, and it's a week-long challenge to employers to basically compete between each other to be the most bike-friendly, or have the most people biking to work, essentially. And last year, I think we had like 300 companies participate, which was cool, and it's going to grow this year. So that's something to keep an eye out. I think other cities do it as well. Chicago for sure. In terms of the engineer piece, that's, I think, probably the biggest impediment to sort of mainstream transportation change in the US is this hold that engineers have on level of service planning. Basically your notion of what a good level of service on a street is how fast cars move through it, which again is totally at odds with a city where your most vulnerable users then are suffering as a result, right? So I don't know, I think that takes longer. I know there are definite leaders, like the former commissioner of the New York City Department of Transportation, Jeanette Sadiq-Khan, started NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. You all should check it out. They created an urban bike lane design guide because AASHTO, which is the American Planning Manual, basically just has no tools in it for urban professionals to plan streets for bikes. And so this bike lane design book is awesome. It really puts out like sort of the best practices and challenges cities to just do it. Why are we waiting on the national scene to change? Why aren't cities just doing this? Because it's the right thing to do. So I think that's been really cool, but certainly we have a long way to go. And I'd be so interested for some planning firm to challenge that level of service model and put out like a pedestrian level of service, right? Or like what's the bike level of service look like?
It seems pretty weird that
I know.
that's the way it is. I don't like that class.
You're a civil engineer.
Yeah.
You guys are like a private, you're not like with the city, right? So,
Yeah. Go ahead, finish your question.
so like, I was wondering like how like cooperative the city is with you. Like, do they come to you and then you have creative control over it, or like,
Yeah.
are you kind of proposing it to them and they like can amend it? And then like during a construction, do you have control?
That's a good question. We're a watchdog. We intentionally, like part of our bylaws is we don't take city funding because that would compromise our ability to watchdog the city. And so we get most of our funding through membership and individual donors. There's some foundation grants, family foundation grants, but that's a good question. It's like, how do we work with the city? And I would say it's changed over the years. There have been times when we've had a totally antagonistic relationship with our city Department of Transportation because they don't do anything, or because they want to block us out, or push back on innovative ideas. I think I've been lucky to work during a time in New York where there's been a lot happening. There's been a lot of change in motion, and my work has been largely about community organizing, bringing people to the table to make sure there's a fair and balanced conversation at the community forums where these things play out. I don't think most people in New York know that it matters if they call their city council person and say, yes, thank you, I support this. I think most people in New York just call or show up when they want to complain. And so that's been a really interesting part of our job, has been to inspire people to show up and to keep showing up and to say, yes, I support this, and make being innovative, being a leader on progressive transportation an election issue, So that doesn't really entirely answer your question, but I would say that I think we do a good balance between pushing the city and working with the city. And a good example I would give you would be the most recent 25-mile-an-hour law. I was up in Albany a couple times. The second to last time was lobbying with the Department of Transportation Commissioner herself and members of Families for Safe Streets. And our campaign to lower the speed limit was something that the city really didn't think they were going to win. And I think they had started to pull back a little bit because they were sort of acknowledging it was going to be tough to pass it. And I heard the Department of Transportation Commissioner, who I now joke with her about this, so I don't feel bad saying this, tell members of Families for Safe Streets that, they should be prepared to not win this session. That it was likely that it wasn't going to happen, but that she committed to being back there next year and making it happen next year. And, she walked away, and I walked away with the members of the group, and I told them, I was like, hell no, we're not walking away. We're winning this session. And we did, but I think it's like, that's a good example of we had to really push. We had to really call on her to keep stepping out on that issue, even though I think they started to get the sense that they needed to pull back. And so, it's a bit of an ebb and flow.
Liam? And then Anna, and then Nell, and then Adam. Liam?
Were you involved in the City Bike project at all? Where you can go from place to place?
Yeah, so we were involved in bike share as advocates, pushing the city to adopt a bike share program, to go after a bike share program. So about 4 years ago, I worked with a bunch of Harvard Business School alumni to do an analysis of how you could fund a bike share program in New York City at the scale we needed it without any public funding. Because back then, it was like a non-starter to imagine using any public funding for bike share. It was just like not going to happen. And so I worked with those folks to put together a business plan and a business model, and we presented that to the city and encouraged them to just go for the private funding model. I also did some equity coalition building work in the Lower East Side and Chinatown with community-based organizations that were gonna, if we got a bike share program, we're gonna be like at the epicenter of that bike share program. And so we did some community design charrettes to talk about what that would mean for the neighborhood and where they would want to see the bike share stations, where they would want to see bike lanes. And the goal there was to make sure that the neighborhood and the communities that were going to be most impacted were going to be at the table. We did a ton of best practices memos on what a bike share system should look like in New York City, so that, because we were really worried they were going to get it wrong. But we were lucky because I think they quickly went from no to yes, and then really going for the program. And then we quickly shifted our work as I basically worked with a bunch of field organizers to build a list with a petition in the neighborhoods where bike share stations were going to go if we got a bike share program, so that when it came time to do the community board meetings and the votes about stations or whether or not the board supported bike share, we had a list to call on to turn out to those meetings. And so we built a list of 60,000 people, very geographically focused in the neighborhoods where bike share would be, and spent about a year mobilizing people to turn out to community forums to say they supported bike share, to say they wanted bike share. And that was super important because there were a ton of people that showed up to those meetings to say, not in my backyard. And that was super key. And so I think now our role has largely been watchdogging again. We never wanted to accept money from the operator. We never wanted to be in any formal relationship with the operator. We always wanted to make sure that we were an advocate for bike share riders. That's who we are. We're the advocate for the rider. And so that work now is fighting for protected bike lanes on some of the major commuter routes, and also fighting for the program to expand, because right now it's only in some neighborhoods. So.
Well, also, have you seen an increase in bike users since that program has been implemented?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reason we cared about bike share from the very beginning is we knew it would be a total game changer. there's no other way you could bring that many new people to biking so quickly than through bike share. So yeah.
Are there plans to like add more bike share bikes to that?
They've been in sort of contract negotiations, I think, for quite some time, trying to work out some of the operator kinks. But I think like pretty much any day we're going to hear an announcement. So keep your ears out.
How many people have ridden on the bike share program in New York? Just a few of us.
It's a good thing to do, and it's pretty easy and it's fun.
All right, Nell.
I have two questions about the bike share
You're
program.
only allowed one.
I have two questions. I was just wondering, I've heard a lot of complaints about like one of the problems with the bike share program and safety is that people don't wear helmets because it's a lot of like quick kind of business trips, things like that where people are carrying helmets around and that can kind of, even though we're creating safer bike lanes, hinder all of the safety aspects to it. I'm just wondering what the transportation alternatives opinion is on that.
Okay, we're totally opposed to helmet laws. The only proven ways to make biking safer are great bike lanes, great enforcement, and more people riding bikes. So we totally, encourage people to make the choice to wear a helmet because it can reduce an injury, but it will never prevent a crash. And there's no good data that says people not wearing helmets means it's not safe to bike. There's only good data showing that if you get a lot of people riding bikes, it's a lot safer to ride bikes. So Vancouver, I think, is still debating whether when their bike share program can launch because they're obsessing about these helmet vending machines. And in my mind, it's really just so short-sighted to get so fixated on this like very individual notion of what it means to be a safe bike rider, when what you see all over the world is that the safest cities to ride bikes in, Copenhagen, et cetera, no one's wearing helmets, right? The streets are designed in a way that is really, it's a safer place to ride a bike, right? So.
All right, slight detour. We're talking about organizing. We're talking about making a difference in your community. Carol Lynn is involved with a group, VPIRG, and others who are planning a major rally tomorrow to draw attention to voting. Heard about it. Give us a quick 1 minute pitch.
Hi, my name is Carolyn. I'm an intern with VPIRG, and we've been working really hard to put together this awesome event tomorrow. If you haven't already registered to vote, you've probably seen this in the Davis Center. You can still register today and tomorrow, but we'll be having a march at 2:30 outside the Royal Tyler Theater. We'll be having a lot of the candidates for the House and Senate positions. They'll be marching with us. You have the chance to talk to them about any issues that are on your mind that you want to see that they're working on. We'll be marching down to City Hall where you can cast your vote early as election day is next week, but it'll be really awesome, and so you guys should all come register to vote and go down with us and actually vote.
Carol, you can still register to vote up till
Up until tomorrow, I believe, until we are marching at 2:30.
You just need your registration form into the city clerk by 5 o'clock on Wednesday, actually. But you can go down to City Hall and register to vote and vote at the same time.
So I'm definitely going to do this 2:30 at Royal Tyler Theater.
Yes.
And
We'll
then-
be meeting up with Champlain students too. They'll be coming down with us, so.
Field trip. All right, are we get free ice cream or anything, or?
Unfortunately, not this event, but I have some handouts also if anybody's interested, so.
Carolyn, will you write that on the board just in case people? Okay. All right, thank you guys. VPIRGers. Vote, you guys. All right, so we have 8 minutes or so with Caroline talking about transportation. Catherine, but Adam first, I think.
All right. So I also had a few questions. First one was, have you noticed a decrease, I guess, in the number of cars on the road, and thus the energy needed for transportation? And also, have you noticed an increase in kind of like electric vehicle use and like electric buses because of these changes on the roads?
It's a great question. I would say, like right off the bat, that I think behavior change takes a long time. Like I don't think we're going to see, like I don't think we've seen any sort of like monumental decrease in driving because of this first stab at changing the streets, but the whole point is it makes it easier for people to make better decisions. So the hope is, of course, that they will. The thing that we don't do right now in New York City, but is very much, I think, there's like the carrot and the stick of behavior change, right? Like the carrot is like you're luring people like bike lanes. The stick would be making it really hard to drive. So I think congestion pricing, I don't know if anyone's heard of congestion pricing. It's not something that we do in New York City, but it's something that like London, for example, has implemented and to great success. And basic idea is that when you drive into the city center during rush hour, you pay a surcharge because you're contributing overall to to negative impact. So you should be paying to do that. And that money, that charge, goes into public transportation. So the idea is it's a new funding stream to build our public transportation infrastructure. We don't have that money right now. So that's the kind of program that I think you would see more immediate impact, if that makes sense. Yeah, and then in terms of the electric buses and vehicles, I mean, I wouldn't say in any huge way. Yeah.
Catherine.
I'm just curious in terms of design where your ideas come from. So for example, do you have a model of projects based on successful projects implemented in other cities?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really lucky in this. So if we were to rewind 10 years ago, I would say that, yeah, we looked to international cities. We looked to Copenhagen. We would look to, Paris was a little ahead of us, actually, to some extent London. But I think really like looking at all the different cities around the world and trying to like synthesize all those ideas and think about what would work best in New York City. We used to share an office with the Institute for Transportation Development Policy. They work internationally on sustainable transportation projects. They actually helped us do the drawings for First and Second Avenue. And we were kicking around ideas back at the time, like should the bike lane be in the dedicated bus lane? That's what Paris does. They have dedicated bus lanes and the bikes share those lanes with buses. We felt really strongly that was a terrible idea, because why are you pitting the bike and the bus against each other? Like, why are the bikes slowing the buses down? It just seems weird. You're not really reallocating space. So we went with the other idea, and that was something that ITDP helped us do. Now, with this NACTO guide, this National Association of City Transportation Official Bike Lane Guide, I think there's just a lot of good ideas out that are US-based finally. So we don't always have to look internationally. New Yorkers hate being compared to Europe. It's like not a winning argument. So it's good that we have some like near to home examples of success. Yeah, it's a good question.
I worked over somewhere out of New Jersey and did a lot of projects in Brooklyn, and we drove very large vehicles with very large trailers behind us, and it's very impossible to navigate through city streets in Brooklyn and things like that, especially with the parkway laws, as you know. Are these bike lanes going into areas where they'd be affecting like commercial vehicles and things like that?
I mean, there's no evidence that they negatively impact commercial vehicles. Actually, a lot of the street designs I showed you add loading zones for trucks in places they didn't exist before. Our parking regulations in New York haven't really been looked at in 50 years either. And so for doing business in New York City, you sort of factor in getting tickets. That's like part of the job. So the good thing about a lot of these designs is a moment to refresh the parking regulations too and make sure that businesses have better access. New York City has truck routes. And so, on the one hand, those truck routes are super important to trucks. On the other hand, it's obviously important to think about what kind of pedestrian and bike design are you adding to make sure that the truck routes are safe, right? But we're lucky in New York. Our streets are really wide. I mean, there really isn't, you're not choosing between being able to do business and ride a bike safely, right? You get to do all that. The street just needs to be designed better.
So I guess my question would be, do you guys consider underground bike lanes, like subways?
I'm curious what everyone else thinks about that. We haven't considered that. Our streets, again, like thinking about the public space that they make up, they're a huge resource to a city. Building tunnels underground is really expensive. We've been building the Second Avenue subway line in New York City for like over a decade. It costs $1 billion a block, I think, or something crazy to build that. Obviously, when it's done, if it's ever done, it's going to be awesome to have more subway, but let's get real about what we're sort of facing as as a world, as a you know, definitely as a city, but as a global population. Like, we don't have time to take that long to build other options for people. We need to use our streets better because they already exist. We're already spending a ton of money to maintain them, and they can just be quickly turned into something more sustainable, right? You can create a surface subway network with buses, and you can do it, you know, in a couple weeks. So that's, you know, that's sort of where we're focused, is like how to better use the street.
Raul?
So the tradition of a city is to build up, and rather than go underground, have you put any thought into like sky rails or that sort of thing?
You know, that's something that London is doing, right? Those like bike highways. Also not something that we're that keen on. I mean, I think if you're trying to lift life away from the street, I mean, you're not really solving the problem of the street, which is that it's sort of dangerous. It encourages behavior that's not contributing positively to the environment. So we think that by bringing all that benefit to the street itself, to the sidewalk, is where you're going to have the most gain.
So we're about to stop here. I get to ask one question though. This is totally out of the blue, Carol. But in Vermont, there's a whole lot of, it's too rural, we can't do this stuff, people don't walk, you know, we have to drive. It's just a waste of time to think about. Do you have any thoughts on that? Obviously, you come from a place where it is tension, but.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that way of thinking is very much in line with like the engineer way of thinking. I mean, I think I've been to a lot of rural environments where there are no sidewalks, but people walking on the side of the road. And it's like, you know, we have to acknowledge that like people are doing more than driving, even in a rural environment. So it's making it safe, it's making it attractive. I don't think that, I mean, we don't work as an organization to make sure no one ever drives again. That's not our job, right? Our job is just to make sure that if you're not driving, you're not totally screwed and looked over. So I think that's got to be the case in a rural environment too. People have, you know, lots of different needs, lots of different ways of getting around, and you have to factor in every street user when you design a street.
Very nice. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.